Welcome to the It's Time podcast with your host, Professor Dale Feinauer, from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs.
Welcome to another one of the UW-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs podcasts focusing on leadership. Today, it will be, you're stuck with me. That's it. There are no guests. There's no distraction for you. You've got me for the podcast. And we're going to be thinking a little bit about leadership and some of the aspects of leadership that are, the first particularly, a little less common, that you typically don't get in a business training program, that aren't in most of the leadership books. But it's an approach to leadership that I think you'll find very interesting. But want to start with a concept that there is no one right answer. That leadership is, in my mind, absolutely fascinating. Because unlike, say, engineering, where you can design a building and there's stresses and there's things to do and et cetera, and there's a blueprint, and yes, it works, and yes, we do it, leadership doesn't work that way. There is no single right answer. It doesn't happen like that. The interesting thing about leadership is you're leading human beings. And human beings, well, they're different. Each one is a little different than the one that you interacted with before. And frankly, they're all pretty quirky. Other than me and you, if you look around, everybody's pretty quirky. They're odd. They do things that are different, which is what makes leadership fascinating, but it's also what makes it challenging. Because, again, there is no one right answer. You can't say this works all the time. My mother's fond of saying that if you want to be an expert in raising children, the game plan is to have one. Because then you will know this works with this child, I tried it, it's good. Or, no, we tried that and it didn't work, so don't ever do that. As soon as you have the second child, and certainly when you have the third or the fourth or the fifth, or in my case, the sixth, you learn that what worked with A doesn't work with B. Leadership is like that. There is no single right answer because humans are unique and different. However, there are some commonalities and some patterns. And as we go through and we talk about leadership, we're going to be looking at what are some things we know about human beings? What are some things we know about human nature that will help us to identify how to be a good leader? And part of this comes from a concept that's a little bit interesting from my perspective, I find absolutely fascinating, called evolutionary psychology. This was developed, fascinatingly, by an etymologist, a bug guy at Harvard, E.O. Wilson, who very recently, very late in 2021, passed away. But he developed this concept of evolutionary psychology. And the base concept is that not only do humans and all species evolve physically, we've evolved to where we have opposable thumbs, which gives us huge advantages in life. We've evolved in many ways to make ourselves more adaptable to the environment and able to reproduce and do well as an organism. But not only do we adapt physically, but we adapt psychologically. There are patterns in human behavior that are hardwired, that are ingrained in us, that are innate, that are instinctual, if you want to use that terminology, that are there because these are things that help the species to survive. We'll talk more about this in one of the later episodes, I'm sure, but just a very easy example, horses. If you go up and you touch a horse and its hindquarters and the horse doesn't know that you're there, what does the horse do? The horse kicks. Why does a horse kick when you're touching its hindquarters? What's a horse's claim to fame? What do horses do that allow horses to survive on our planet? They don't have particularly big teeth. They don't have great claws. They're not great fighters, if you will. Horses are fast. Horses' thing is they can run away from you if you're a threat. Obviously, they can't run away from you very well if something happens to their legs. So horses, over time, have evolved to instinctually, as a function of evolutionary psychology, kick if something is spooking them, if you will, around their hindquarters, because it could be a wolf biting at their Achilles tendon trying to lay them low. So they just instinctually kick because Horses who kick when something is around their hindquarters are more likely to survive, pass on their genes to the next generation. One more quick example of evolutionary psychology from the human or from the animal side before we get into our base topic for the day. Bears and bear cubs. Mother bears in the United States keep cubs with them for 2 or 3 years. Some mother bears will have a bear cub with them for 2 years. Some will keep cubs with them for 3. It just varies across the bear, if you will. However, in Sweden, almost all mother bears keep their cubs with them for 3 years. Now, obvious question is, well, why would Swedish bears be into 3 years as opposed to American bears that would keep their cubs 2 or 3? Well, you could argue, Sweden's kind of a socialist society where the state takes care of people, so mother bears have kind of gotten into that taking care of the young thing, so they keep the young with them for 3 years. But we really don't think Swedish mother bears are more socialist than American mother bears. The answer is that in Sweden, they have a very strong law that says, thou shalt not shoot a bear with cubs. If there's a mother bear that has cubs around it, and you shoot that bear, you are in a world of hurt. So, in Sweden, no one shoots a mother bear with cubs. Now, do the mother bears think, oh, I know, let's keep the cubs around because then these hunters can't shoot me? No, the bears don't conceptualize all that. But the bears who develop the psychological pattern of keeping young with them for 3 years as opposed to 2 are more likely to survive, more likely to pass on their genetic material. And so bears in Sweden have adopted the psychology of, the innate behavior of keeping young with them for 3 years. That's evolutionary psychology at work. As we think about humans that we're going to be trying to lead, we're going to be thinking some about evolutionary psychology. We're going to be thinking some across these episodes about what do we know about human beings? What do we know that are the commonalities of how humans behave that will allow us to figure out how to do a good job of leading human beings? One of the things that we know about human beings is that we are a relationship-driven species. There's a theory of human behavior, of motivation theory, called the ERG theory, Alderfer's ERG theory. Well, what is this? It's sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of need, but Alderfer's ERG theory says there are 3 needs, as opposed to Maslow's 5, and those 3 being existence, relatedness, and growth. That human beings have a need for existence. It's sort of like everybody, I assume, knows Maslow's. For some reason, that's beat into everybody. It's Maslow's first couple of needs. So there's existence. I need food, I need shelter, I need things to physically survive, I need water, I need etc. But then there are relatedness needs. There are things that I need in order to be able to be comfortable as a human being that are about social interaction. I need other people around me. We are a tribe, a gregarious species by nature. That is, from an E.O. Wilson perspective, part of our evolutionary psychology. The third is growth. And Alderfer argues that human beings have a need to grow. We want to grow and develop. We want to be more next year than we are this year. When I was raised with this possibility, when I was faced with this question of, would you want to do a podcast? My immediate thought was, well, no, I don't want to do a podcast. I hate technology, and technology hates me. So why would I possibly want to do something like that? That seems like a very bad idea. But as I thought about it, I was like, oh, it would be a growth opportunity for you, Dale. That is kind of outside your comfort zone. So, all right, let's do that. And this may work and be great, or it may be a total failure. But even if it's total failure, you'll learn something from it. My experience has been in life, I've learned more from my failures than I learned from my successes. So let's try it. It's a growth thing. The other thing I would note about Alderfer is Alderfer says that we have these 3 needs, existence, relatedness, and growth. And that if one of these needs does not get met, we tend to regress from that need. We tend to back off of that need and quit trying to get that need met, at least in that particular environment. And I think Alderfer's ERG theory is a really useful theory when we think about leadership and motivating the individuals that we're working with. That we need to be thinking about what are we doing to provide existence needs for them, which largely in organization is money. But we also need to be thinking about relationships. People want to be interacting. They want to be enjoying other human company, but they also want to be growing. And I think this concept is particularly relevant to one of the real challenges we have in leadership, and that is how do we deal with dead wood? I'm convinced that in organizations, I'm a simple person. So I think of my employees as being in three categories. I've got employees that are stars. They're hitting it out of the park. They're doing a great job. I've got employees that are solid citizens. They're good. Day in and day out, they're meeting expectations. They're doing the job. And third, there's dead wood. There are some employees in almost all of your organizations that are dead wood. And I define dead wood as people that you believe that if you had them leave the organization, you went out, recruited, retained somebody new, trained somebody new, even in this tight labor market, you think you could probably get somebody who would be better than the person who's in that job now. This is the coach for the football team who's saying, yeah, I got this person who's my starting tackle now, but I really think I can find somebody else who would be a better tackle. We also know that at the entry level, that percentage is perceived to be higher, 30, 40%. But as you raise up the organizational ranks, it keeps diminishing. And it's a very clean line. The higher you go, the smaller the percentage is. So you get to the senior ranks of an organization, you're single digits. They think there's very little dead wood in the organization. Well, why does that exist? And what does it mean? And what do we do about it? We think that one of the reasons it exists is that people lie to their bosses about the existence of dead wood. People don't want to go to their boss and say, boss, 5 of the 20 people that report to me are dead wood, because A, that results in their sort of owning to their boss, I'm not doing a great job of managing my subordinates because I've got all this dead wood. And 2, the boss is going to say, well, okay, deal with it. And that's probably going to be some combination of development activities and potentially termination and rehires, all of which sounds like work. And so the manager doesn't want to own the dead wood to their next level. So they're being disingenuous about the amount of dead wood that they have. So as you move up the organizational hierarchy, there keeps being a percentage of less and less dead wood. Another reason why I think there's a perception of less dead wood as you move up the organization is senior management owns the organization, if you will, emotionally, psychologically, and no one wants to be the CEO of an organization and say, yeah, and I got to admit, 1/5 of the people that are working here really aren't trying very hard and are dead wood. That kind of says you're kind of lousy at being the CEO. So psychologically, that's not the case. This raises the question, well, who are these dead wood and what should leadership do about it? Well, question number one is who are they? And we'll get to what we do about it. If the dead wood were new hires, these are people in their first 60, 90 days, and when you hire, it's never a perfect process. The recruitment process clearly is problematic. I've heard it described as a scenario where applicants to the organization lie about how wonderful they are. The company lies about how great a place they would be to work, and then we're surprised it doesn't work out. Obviously, we get recruitment wrong from time to time. When we look at it, we delve into this, we find that most dead wood is not new hires. These are not people who've only been around 30, 60, 90 days, and they're working themselves through the developmental process. They're working themselves through a process which will, in 90 days, 6 months, certainly a year, have them out of the organization. Dead wood in organization is often people who've been around 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the organization. Well, how does that happen? Well, these people weren't always dead wood. When we look at the dead wood in organization, they were often, going back to my simplistic 3 ways of thinking of your employees, they were often solid citizens, and in many cases, they were stars. They were employees who at one point in the organization, they were doing great. The organization valued them. They were being given the difficult assignments. They were being challenged to take on new things. Their career was blossoming and going great guns. And leadership viewed them as, hey, these are great people to have in the organization. These are people I need to keep around. This is some of my gold. This is some of the secret sauce that makes this place work. And somehow they went from being stars to being dead wood. Well, how does that happen? Well, I think it's back to ERG theory. I think it's back to Alderfer. I think he's given us a real nugget here. Humans want existence, they want relatedness, and they want growth. But if their growth opportunities are stymied in environment A, they regress away from those. They move away from that particular need in that particular environment. I think we all regress away from unmet needs. I challenge you to think about high school topics. What were the high school topics that you were worst at? And if I ask you to divide the world into high school topics that you were good at and you were bad at, and you generate the list of topics that you weren't so good at, easy for me to do, spelling, writing, I was terrible at both. And then you identify what are the topics that are particularly important to doing well in life. I got to be good at X if I'm going to succeed in life. How many of you would put these topics that you're not particularly good at into the camp of that's really important to doing well in life? And what we find is almost nobody puts the stuff that they weren't good at into the being important. We regress away from it. I cannot spell to save my life. Farm with an F, pharmacy with a PH. Why is that? That's just stupid. It's a dumb language. Okay, I've quickly identified that I don't need to know how to spell. We have spell check. We have etc. There are multiple ways to make this happen, and so spelling isn't important. We'll talk more about my writing in a subsequent podcast, but we regress away from those things. So what I'm convinced happens in organizations is you have an employee whose career is growing, an employee whose career is doing well. They're getting growth needs met. But then, over time, their growth needs stop being met. They have a job which they could do in their sleep. I've had the same assignment. I'm doing the same basic work. I'm not getting the new assignments. Maybe I'm no longer viewed as sort of the up-and-coming whiz kid, so I'm not getting that growth potential met. And so I start being frustrated at work because I used to be growing. I used to feel at the end of the year that I had learned stuff that I didn't know at the beginning of the year, that I was becoming more valuable to the organization. But now I feel like I've kind of plateaued. I've reached a level where my promotional opportunities, where my individual growth opportunities simply are not what they used to be. I've learned everything I can learn about this mixer and this technology stuff, and there's everything I can do to be getting better at the technical stuff of podcasts I got. And it used to be a fascinating challenge to get better at it, but now that's gone because I've climbed that mountain, if you will, and there isn't a new mountain presented to me. So now I'm going to regress away from growth. I no longer think of work as a place that gets my growth needs met. So you may very well have followers, individuals that you're responsible for leading, who used to be largely self-motivated because they wanted to grow, they wanted to develop. They saw the organization as meeting that need. And I don't see the organization as meeting that need anymore.
Students in the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh MBA Executive Program get a first-hand look at global business in action during a 10-day international study tour, visiting 2 countries and exploring diverse cultures around the world. Rated one of the most impactful elements of the executive program, cohorts have toured top-tier businesses in Accra, Ghana, Beijing, China, Nagasaki, Japan, Panama City, Panama, Seoul, South Korea, Stockholm, Sweden, and more. Be part of something bigger than yourself and experience education beyond classroom walls. Connect with an MBA advisor today by emailing mba@uwosh.edu to learn more about the MBA Executive Program and upcoming international study tours. That's mba@uwosh.edu. It's time to achieve more.
It ain't happening. But they still have a need for growth. So instead of growing by getting better at the university and doing a better job of being good in the classroom, mastering the capability of teaching remotely. I decided, no, that's not for me. Technology hates Dale. I'm not going to be able to teach remotely, so I'm not going to do it. If I had backed off and not taken on the challenge of learning how to do these podcasts, my growth may have been stymied. At that point, I don't think of the university as meeting my growth needs. So I get my growth needs met someplace else. I get really good at bowling. I get really good at deer hunting. I get really good at day drinking. I get really good at something other than growing at work. All right. So my growth needs met someplace else. Now let's think about my relationship to work. Work is now an organization, a relationship that I have that meets two needs. It meets my existence needs and my relatedness needs. So this is a place to get paid and to socialize. So you've got a person in your organization who used to be hustling and trying to grow and develop, who now is focused on, I want to make as much money as I can, but basically this is a place to hang out. This is a place to socialize. From a leader perspective, this sounds like a really bad thing. This is Deadwood occurring. This is the process that we need to find a way to nip in the bud. So as a leader, you need to be dropping back and asking the question, what do I know about my people? What do I know about their challenges? Am I continuing to give them growth opportunities? Am I continuing to give them things that are challenging them so they're going to want to be excited? This is particularly true for your stars. There may be solid citizens who are fine without a lot of growth, and they're okay with, I'm doing what I did last year and I'm plugging along. But your stars, your really good employees, if they don't have that new growth opportunity at work, they're going to find it someplace else, and their interest in the organization is going to nosedive. As a leader, you need to know your people. One of the things that's absolutely critical as we go through this process of thinking about leadership is this intense need to understand your employees. I really like the concept that you don't lead people, you lead persons. I'm fond of saying I'm not particularly fond of people. I really don't think humans are all that wonderful a species. If you think about it, what we've done to the planet, what we do to each other, there's some advantages we'll talk about. I love persons. I think individuals that I know are absolutely fascinating and great, and they're a wonderful source of joy in my life. But as a species, just a mass of 100 people to hang with and to be around. As a leader, you need to understand your people. And by understanding your people, knowing whether giving that additional assignment is going to be, hey, I was really looking for a new challenge, this energizes me, or knowing that this new assignment is overloading me. I'm now feeling swamped. I'm now going to become Deadwood because I'm frantic with all the things I have to do. I can't possibly do them all. I'm overloaded. My home relationships are deteriorating because of all the stuff that work is dumping on me. I become Deadwood another way. As we think about the stars, solid citizens, Deadwood mix, we want to think about a couple other things. One, as we think about this existence of Deadwood, there's a question, what do we want to do about it? But first, the question of ratio. How much stars, solid citizens, Deadwood do you want? I don't think it's realistic to say we're going to have no Deadwood in the organization. I just don't think that's very likely to happen. You're going to hire some people. There are going to be some mistakes. If you can get down to single digits, 5% Deadwood in your organization, that's a wonderful thing. So I think that's a good goal. But we also need to think about the stars to solid citizens ratio. I don't think it's desirable to maximize the number of stars, the percentage of stars you have in the organization. I don't think that's a good thing to do for several reasons. One, stars are just expensive. They're expensive in terms of you have to pay them well. They're emotionally expensive because they're draining, because they're always doing things and they're pushing the window and etc. And they sort of are competing with each other for attention and for getting things done. So if I'm running an organization, I'd like 15% of my employees to be stars, 80% of my employees to be solid citizens, maybe 5% Deadwood, I think is a reasonable ratio. But I don't want to get everybody in stars, because if everybody's a star, Everybody's looking to get promoted. Everybody's looking to do things. Everybody's pushing the window. And we simply don't have the capacity in an organization to be saying yes to all of those folks. So I want to think about that ratio. But let's think now about the second thing. My ratio isn't what I want. I am more deadwood than I want in an organization. What do I do about it? Well, I think of this in three ways. One, how do I prevent deadwood? Two, how do I help people move from being deadwood back to being a solid citizen or a star? Or how do I move them out of the organization? Well, let's think about these three. First, how do we prevent them? Maybe the most important, but clearly the longer run. This is the Yule log. This is not just kindling for the fire. This is stuff you got to plan and work on for the long term. How do we prevent people from becoming dead wood? I'm back to Alderfer's ERG. If one of the reasons I'm a star or solid citizen is because I'm getting growth needs met, but I'm at risk of becoming dead wood because I'm not getting that need met, let's find a way to get back to having some of the growth needs met. How can we take that person who's done accounts receivable for 10 years, is now to the point where they could do accounts receivable in their sleep? How do we move them to accounts payable? Take the accounts payable, make the accounts receivable. Give them something new to do so that there is more interest in their job. Talk to them, ask them, what do you want to do? What would be interesting for you? What would be an interesting challenge for you to have in the organization? Where are you in life? Do you want this new challenge? So I think a big piece of this is understanding your employees well enough to be managing their career in a way that they're getting sufficient growth opportunities so that they're feeling a satisfaction of the growth need from the organization. If you're not doing that, you're likely growing your dead wood because they're not getting this growth need met. So one opportunity, avoid getting dead wood, know your people, give them enough growth. Second, we've got people that are dead wood. What do we do about it? Well, hopefully we can grow them out of the organization. Grow them in the organization, not out. We'll get to out in a minute. Help them grow so that they move from being dead wood to solid citizens, or maybe all the way back to being a star. In my mind, this involves a couple of conversations, a couple of focuses of conversation. One, okay, I got to figure out why this person is dead wood. There's an absence of growth. There's an absence of some met need in the organization. Maybe there's some external thing going on in their life. I'm going through a terrible divorce. I've got spouse, children with health issues. There are other things that are distracting me from work, and I've simply put work on hold, and I'm just going through the motions, and I'm barely doing that so that I can focus on other things in life. All right, let's take a deep breath. Let's look at what are the causes and what do we do about it. How do we help the individual to dig themselves out of this dead wood scenario, turn the page, okay, now's the time to going back to being a solid citizen. So let me help you with some resources to deal with some things on the outside. Let me help you put some of that in a box so that you can focus on work and do the things you need to do to grow and to go from being dead wood to a solid citizen, if not a star in the organization. The other part of this is you do have to help them understand that what they're doing is unacceptable. The status quo is not going to continue. You are currently dead wood in the organization. Here are expectations. You're not meeting the expectations. This is a problem. And if you don't start meeting expectations, then we're going to have to eliminate the employment relationship. You will be fired. I think this can be a useful thing to help people understanding sort of, hey, I've hit a bottom here. I've got to do something to shift, or I'm not going to be working here. I can't let the status quo go. And so I think that can be a helpful thing to getting employees to a point where they will motivate themselves to move from being dead wood back to being a solid citizen or a star. Third case scenario, though, is there are some people that just aren't a good fit due to the things that have occurred in their personal life, due to the evolution of the organization. They were a bad hire to begin with. There are people that need to go. And my experience has been in organizations, we do a terrible job of dealing with terminations in organizations. And when we ask people about this, we get a whole bunch of this sort of pointing the finger the other way. That HR people say, well, the line managers have done a terrible job of documenting that the employee hasn't met expectations, so we can't terminate them. And you talk to the supervisor and they say, well, we can't terminate these people because HR won't let us. And so there's this pointing fingers either way, and they both justify it and go on about their business, and nobody tackles and makes this hard decision. Nobody does what you need to do to move forward. In my mind, you need as an organization to have a very well laid out process for dealing with Deadwood, hopefully helping Deadwood grow and develop and become a solid citizen or a star, but if not, terminating their employment. And you need to have a process. And just as we teach people how to recruit, how to interview, how to make selection decisions, we teach people how to make promotion decisions, we in organizations as a leader, you need to teach your people how do you do termination. Both what's the process that leads to we're pulling the trigger and what happens that day. And both of those are going to be organization specific. Organizations have their own rules and their own cadence and their own processes, but you need to have that down. That needs to be understood. People need to get it. My personal bias is you go to the employee who's Deadwood and say, hey, not meeting expectations. We need to see some movement here. Let's be clear on the expectations. Let's be clear on the gap. And now let's collaboratively think about how we can grow and develop. What can we do? We, pronoun we, so that you can go from being Deadwood back to being a solid citizen. Are there resources that we need? Or there's training that you need? What can we do? Maybe we've overloaded you and we've given you more to do than you can possibly get done. So we need to change the expectations. How can we come up with a plan that will help you move from being Deadwood to a solid citizen? We talk about that, we document that, we identify who's responsible for what, we launch that plan, and hopefully that plan results in a Deadwood person moving into a solid citizen. Phase 2, though, is if that doesn't happen, we need to have a second conversation. Second conversation is pretty much the first conversation over again, but with one addition. You make it very clear that if something doesn't happen, you will be terminated. This is enough of a problem that this will result in ending the employment relationship. Now, this could be done as a fairly innocuous, we're not sure this is going to work out if we don't make something happen, and everybody understands what you're saying. Or some people, you need to be a little more blatant. If this does not change, you will be fired. And you need to be that blunt. They need to walk away from conversation 2 with an understanding that their job is in jeopardy. I think it's only fair to them that the leader explain, look, your job is at risk. Being fired should never be a surprise. You should know that this was going to happen if. Now, if after the second conversation there still is an absence of performance, then you have to make the difficult decision to terminate. And that's never fun. Well, I can't say never. I've fired at least, one person in my life that I thoroughly enjoyed. This was an individual who was known as crossing the line in terms of sexual harassment. He wasn't my subordinate. I was actually a consultant in the organization, but I knew the family business well enough that I was comfortable doing this. I was walking down the hall. He was walking down the hall in front of me, and he grabbed the backside of the woman that he was walking down the hallway. And just grabbed. And I looked at him and I stopped him and I said, you're fired, get out. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. He had it coming. I knew he had been a dink within the organization. Don't be a dink. But usually 99% of the times, termination is not fun. Even if there are justifiable reasons from an organizational perspective, these are people with spouses and lives and house payments and careers and ambitions and plans, and termination upsets all of that. So it's not a fun thing to do, but I'm convinced as a leader, you have an obligation to the organization to make these difficult calls if need be. I'm also convinced that it sets a pattern in an organization. An organization that tolerates people not meeting expectations on an ongoing basis breeds people not meeting expectations on an ongoing basis because they know that it's okay. On the other hand, if you set the precedent that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated, employees then know and understand that that behavior is unacceptable. And I'm a bit of a deviant here in the sense of I'm okay with this being relatively public information. Now, talk to your legal counsel. I'm not an attorney. I've never played one on TV. But my understanding is that truth is an absolute defense in terms of a slander or libel claim. And there's nothing wrong with letting employees know that employee X was terminated and they were terminated for this reason. Let me drop back. I love stories and I love history and do a quick historical piece. Queen Elizabeth, Elizabeth I. She is the daughter of Henry VIII. And I'm going to assume your English history is a little limited in nature, as most people's are. And Elizabeth becomes Queen of England after Henry VIII has died, and actually her older half-sister has died. And Elizabeth's mom, Anne Boleyn, is no longer in the picture because she had been killed by Henry VIII previously. Elizabeth becomes Queen of England. Now, this is a long time ago, and what was the assumption that the first thing that Elizabeth needs to do is what? She's now the Queen of England. So what does she need to do to run the country? Well, she needs to do the obvious thing, which is she needs to get married to have a guy who can run the country, because a woman can't run the country. That's just a silly concept. So everybody assumed Elizabeth was going to get married. Now put yourself in Elizabeth's shoes. Empathy, a very important skill as a leader. You're Elizabeth. You're now the Queen of England. At this point in time in history, if you are the monarch, you are ordained by God. It is perceived that God made you the monarch because God wanted you to be the monarch. So anything you say is the will of God. So you're now ordained by God. You've got God as your backup on everything you tell people to do. Not a bad gig. Or you could get married. Now, if you get married, you immediately become the property of your husband. And as Elizabeth well knows, because this is what happened to her mother, Anne Boleyn, your husband might decide to kill you. So Elizabeth has no desire to get married. So Elizabeth does a little dating, if you will, a little flirting, I guess I should more so say, but she's not marrying anybody. Well, a number of the nobility get together and go, Elizabeth ain't marrying anybody. She's supposed to be marrying one of us. One of us should be the king, and we're going to take care of our buds, but she's not. So three of them get together and plot to kill Elizabeth. And they're going to put her cousin on the throne, and there was a Protestant Catholic thing buried in there. But they were going to kill Elizabeth, and then they assumed that her cousin they knew her cousin would become the queen, and her cousin would marry one of the three of them, and then that person becomes king, great, and going to take care of the other buds. Elizabeth learns about this. What does Elizabeth do? Well, in this time frame in English history, if you were nobility and you were to be executed, you were killed with a longsword. Big, heavy, long, sharp object. Not nobility, an axe. Not as heavy, not as big a blade, easier to miss the neck and only do a part of the neck as opposed to the whole thing. So the nobility gets to be killed with a longsword because it's going to be one quick blow and you're done. Axe, might take a couple of strokes. Clearly not a good thing from the being executed person's perspective. So how does Elizabeth have them killed? This is nobility. Do they get the longsword? Do they get the axe? No, they get neither. They are drawn and quartered. Let's fast forward 2 or 3 years. Elizabeth still's not married. You're one of the nobility. One of your noble friends comes to you and says, I think we ought to do Elizabeth in. Because then cousin becomes queen, she'll marry one of us. What's your next move? How many of you would be in for, yeah, I'm down with being part of the plot to kill Elizabeth? I don't think so. And if you knew what you were doing, you immediately went to Elizabeth and said, so-and-so is plotting to do you in, which you should be doing because Elizabeth was sending nobility out to talk to other nobility and say, hey, we ought to kill Elizabeth. And unless you immediately reported to Elizabeth, she knew that that person was being disloyal because they weren't ratting him out. Have him done in. up until the time of the current Queen Elizabeth, Elizabeth I, longest reigning monarch in English history. She was doing something right. I'm not a fan of public executions. I'm not a fan of firing people in public, but I think the motivational impact of saying this is unacceptable behavior, and if you engage in this behavior, something bad happens to you, should not be overlooked in leadership and organization. I love to lead with positive reinforcement. I love to lead with all the positive motivation I can. I'm also convinced that fear is not an insignificant motivator and should not be taken off the table.
The future of business is data-driven. Employers in every sector need people who can analyze large amounts of data, think critically to understand its impacts, and work with teams to convert insights into actions. The University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business offers a graduate-level data analytics certificate to provide the most current and applicable skills in this area of high demand. In just 9 months, you will learn about the most important strategies, tactics, and methods of analyzing data, and put yourself in a position to advance your career. The Data Analytics Certificate can also serve as a starting point into the MBA Professional Program. Learn about the curriculum, program start dates, tuition, and more by visiting uwo.sh/data analytics. That's uwo.sh/data-analytics.
As you're thinking about providing growth opportunities for people that are Deadwood or solid citizens that you're wanting to have become stars, or even stars that you want to keep as stars, you do need to think about a distinction in employees. And this isn't an absolute, but it's an important distinction along a continuum. And that is the extent to which a person has an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control. The vast majority of people in the United States have an external locus of control. They see the world as something happens to them. Who gets ahead? Well, it could be being at the right place at the right time. It could be you know the right person. External locus of control basically breaks into those two spots, if you will, those two categories, that it's random chance, being at the right place at the right time, or things happen because you know people. It's the relationship stuff. It's who you know, not what you know, that gets you ahead. But a minority of people have an internal locus of control. These are people who believe they can do almost anything if they put their mind to it. I have to own I'm an internal locus of control person. I have huge faith in my ability to do stuff. When I was new at Oshkosh, I've been at Oshkosh about 4 years, and Phil Mounts, who was active in our faculty senate, came to me and said, "Dale, I think you ought to run for the faculty senate. I think that'd be a good spot for you. I think you could be useful in the faculty senate." And I'd enjoyed politics. I'd worked in politics in high school. I worked for President Nixon's reelection committee. I was involved on a number of campaigns. I chaired the campaign for the president of the school board when he ran for reelection when I was a student. We'll talk more about that one in a later podcast. But so I thought, oh, this sounded interesting. But I had a number of mentors, and this sounded like a fairly significant commitment of time. So I went to a couple of my other mentors and said, "What do you think? Should I run for the faculty senate?" And the first one said, "No, I don't think you ought to run for the faculty senate," because at that time there was this real divide, pro-administration, anti-administration people, and they were really fighting with each other, and the anti-administration people dominated the Senate, and it was messy. And basically said, "Dale, I don't think you should. I don't think it'd be a good use of your time." I went to another mentor. I asked her, and she said, "Dale, absolutely not. Because there is no way you can have a positive impact in the Senate. The Senate is full of crazy people that are non-productive, and this would just be a waste of your time. You could not possibly have a positive impact in the Senate." And I walked out of her office and was like, "Oh, damn it. Now I got to run for the Senate." Once she said I couldn't possibly do it, I had no choice. I have a strong internal locus of control. As soon as you tell me I can't do something, I have to do it. I tell my students that, look, if you really want to figure out how to convince me to give you a day off, tell me I can't figure out how to give you a day off, and then I'll try and find a way to get you a day off. But telling me I have to, that doesn't buy you anything. Internal locus of control people, when faced with a challenge, they're like, "Ooh, cool." And the more difficult the challenge, the more, "Oh, this is great. This is a wonderful opportunity for me to prove once again how wonderful I am and I can get stuff done." And it tends to snowball. You have an internal locus of control, You do stuff, you're faced with a challenge, it's a difficult challenge, but you succeed, stronger internal locus of control. We know CEOs, huge internal locus of controls, vast majority. Majority of people in the United States, though, have an external locus of control. This is a very different scenario, and you have to kind of drop back and think about their mindset. If I have an external locus of control and you give me a difficult challenge, I don't necessarily see that as an opportunity to succeed and to once again prove that I can do things. I see this as an opportunity often to fail. There's a fascinating expression, way to look at life. You can't fail if you don't try. Now think about that for a minute. But I've dealt with plenty of employees who have basically said, look, I don't want to try doing that. As long as I don't try, I can't fail. I won't fail at that because I'm never going to try. Those are not people who, faced with a challenge, a growth opportunity, are necessarily going to grab it. So when I'm looking at how to motivate somebody with a challenge to move them from Deadwood to solid citizen to maybe a star, I have to understand how strong is their internal locus of control versus how strong is their external. And as I said, this is a continuum. So I want to be thinking about, if this is a fairly strong external locus of control person, I want to give them a challenge. But I need to give them baby steps. I need to give them, okay, we could do podcasts. Dale, do you want to do a podcast? No, that's overwhelming if I didn't have an internal locus of control, and I would freak out and say no. Dale, would you be willing to draft a document talking about why the College of Business might want to do a podcast? Oh, okay, that's a small step. I can do that. Give me baby steps, and maybe you can walk me to the point of doing a podcast, but you got to hold my hand through the process because the overall is overwhelming for somebody with an external locus of control. Internal locus of control, more likely to buy it. As I say, it's a continuum. So I got to think about internal versus external locus of control when I'm thinking about whether a challenge is going to be an interesting thing or not. I also have to think of the psychology of the person who's Deadwood. And this is a useful thing to wrap your head into. When you go to work, I'm going to assume you listeners are not Deadwood. When you go to work each day, or when you're going home at the end of the day, you think about, was this a good day? Was I productive today? Did I have a good day? And it's a question of productive. What did I get done? What did I accomplish? What did I achieve? But let's assume you're Deadwood. What's your goal? Driving in the office, you're Deadwood. You know you're Deadwood. We know that everybody in the organization know who's Deadwood in the organization. What's my goal for the day? I don't want to get fired. Now let that sink in for a minute. I'm an employee in your organization. And as I go to work every day, my objective is don't get fired. Lay low, slide under the radar, don't be seen, don't get caught screwing up, meaning don't take on any significant challenges, and I can avoid getting fired. Now, if I'm going to help that person turn from being Deadwood to a solid citizen, and I need to give them growth, I'm going to need to give them some challenge. But they may be concerned that this is going to be an opportunity to give them the organization a rationale to fire them, and may very well do the what's in it for me. Now, if they have an internal locus of control, and they still have it because they've been doing growth stuff other places, all right, give them a challenge. They're going to get back on track. They're going to be solid citizen stars. If they have lack of an internal locus of control, then I really need to be working on the baby steps to help them make it happen. I also, frankly, need to be focused on fear as more of a motivator. If you do not take on this challenge and you do not make this happen, then we will fire you, because external locus of control folks are more motivated by fear than our internal locus of control people. The other question is rewards. Organization, you're a leader, you're going to a subordinate, I want to promote you, I want to give you a new opportunity. It doesn't have to be a promotion, it's a challenge, it's a new thing I want you to do. What do I offer you to do that? This, to some extent, is a generational difference. I'm old. I'm of a generation where when the boss came to me and said, Dale, hey, there's an interesting challenge, something you could do, my attitude was, great, fine, let me do it. And my assumption is, in the long run, they'll take care of me. I'll be reasonably well compensated. I've been well taken care of by the college and the university. I have no complaints. But I'll take on the challenge and assume something good is going to happen. There's been a generational shift. Over time, we see employees being faster to ask the question, well, what's in it for me? Okay, I can take on that challenge. I think I can do it. Do I get a promotion? Do I get a raise? Do I get more time off? And interestingly, employees would rather have time off than money. You ask your employees, would you rather have a 2% bonus at the end of the year if you kick on something, or would you have a bonus week of vacation? 1 week of vacation is equally 2% of their base pay. 85, 90% of employees, I don't have a survey on this, and that's not a good statistic, it's my impression, 85, 90% of employees will tell you they would rather have the time than the money. But what do you dangle in front to reward them for making it happen? Across the generations, you need to be more explicit up front with what's the payoff than what you may have done historically. Now, as an older generation person, you can be frustrated by that and say, kids these days, damn it, they're not motivated like we were. We'd work hard and then assume we got something out of the deal. Well, you can look at it a different way. Oh, my parents were stupid. They did stuff and hoped to be rewarded. I made sure I cut the deal up front. Well, as a company, how often do you ship products to the customer and hope that they'll pay you for it eventually? You don't do that. You cut the deal on what the price is going to be before you schlep them product. That's just prudent business. So it's a change, and I think we need to understand that change in employees overall. Within a generation, there's loads of variation. So as you're thinking about how do we motivate folks that are dead wood to motivate them to move back into solid citizen or back into stars, again, you got to climb into their head. What motivates them? Internal or external locus of control? Are they motivated by money? Are they motivated by recognition? We'll talk more about motivation in a subsequent podcast, but it's an important variable to be looking at the individual and understanding them as you are making this transition.
It's Time is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs in association with Venture Project Studios. Executive producer, Aaron J. Armstrong. Host, Professor Dale Feinauer. Creative Director, Madison Potratz. Director of Photography, Elazar Kloon. Audio and Video Editor, Elazar Kloon. Marketing Strategy, Tara Larson. Social Media, Anwar Mahana. A special thanks to L Creative, Top View Media, Michael Patton, and the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs.